Hello everyone and welcome back to this next panel. It's entitled Privacy Enhancing Consent-Based Digital Identity, and it's my pleasure to welcome you here. My name is Colin Wallis. I'm the Executive Director of Kantara Initiative and I'm your moderator for today, and I'm joined by an esteemed set of panelists, three from industry associations plus Kantara as well, and a banking representative. So let me introduce them. Dear Banerji from Women in Identity, Gail Hodges from Future Identity Council, Andrew Black from the NatWest banking group, and David Pollington from the GSMA, that's the mobile operator folks. So it's great to have you all here. And just before we make a start, I would like to let you know that in terms of questions that you have for the panel, please just pop them in the chat. And if you wouldn't mind putting an @ sign and the first name of the panelist, if you would like a particular panelist to answer the question. If it's general to the panel, then just leave that blank or just put @ sign panel so that we know how to answer your questions best we can. Okay, with that, I just want to mention that we have 3 topics that we're going to try and get through in this session. The first one is, will the financial services sector embrace the decentralized identity model? It'll be interesting to see. There's a lot of conjecture on that one, and we're thinking particularly about AML and KYC and the potential for verifiable claims such as age verification and so on as we do that. The second topic that we're going to address is how can we ensure to build digital identity which enhances privacy and consent, granting users control over their personal credentials and how they're shared. So the third one that we have, and we're going to be tight for time, but we'll do our best, is, are users actually ready to take control of their digital identity? It's an interesting question with all this new tech. So with that in mind, those 3 comments, those 3 topics, I just want to pass back to the panelists themselves to give a brief introduction of themselves and their organisation, and I'll wrap it up at the end. So, Dia, could we start with you, please?
Absolutely, and thank you for that. Hi everyone, I'm Dia Banerji, and I wear a few hats. But for today's discussion purposes, I am the ambassador for Scotland for Women in Identity, and I also am the advisor for the Blockchain Identity Lab at Edinburgh Napier University. I have the privilege of seeing emerging technology in identity which which are being developed right now, and I find use cases for them. So it's a very, very exciting job that I have, and I'm very, very happy to be here today and to speak with all of you.
That's great. Thank you so much. Over to you, Andrew. You're next on my screen.
Thanks, Colin. Yeah, hi everyone. So I'm Andrew Black. I'm a senior product owner at NatWest Group, one of the largest core banks in the UK, for those who haven't come across us. Within the group, my role sits across data, digital identity and open banking. So I'm responsible for our retail banking arm, and our 17 million retail banking customers, rolling out products and services around data management, open banking deliveries for the retail bank, and then also looking at digital identity and how we support our personal customers, and then also how we look to support our corporate clients as well.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, very interesting. Gail, can I ask you to introduce yourself and Future Identity Council?
Great. Thanks, Colin. I'm Gail Hodges, and I'm with the Future Identity Council. And our mission is to help governments issue digital IDs that are private and secure and easy to use, and ultimately then scalable. And we're working on drafting guidelines that hit that gap between current policies and the standards that are still emerging. We're working with 5 countries, 8 US states, 3 US federal departments, and many leading interest groups like Colin's Kantara that Colin's representing, and many other leading digital platforms and private entities. Prior to joining and leading the Future Identity Council, I was at Apple, where I was leading identity and Latin American markets for Apple Pay. And prior to Apple, I led digital payments for HSBC globally and ran card portfolios for HSBC and for American Express. So it's a pleasure to be here today.
That's great, and another sort of banking angle that we have there in your background. David, can we pass on to you and to the GSMA?
Yeah, absolutely. Hi there, everyone. Thanks, Colin. Yeah, so David Pollington, I work at the GSMA. I'm the Senior Director for Products and Technology. I've been working in the telco industry for about 25 years plus, primarily at mobile operators, but now within the GSMA, it's the trade body really for all of the mobile operators worldwide, as well as representing the mobile industry. There's a broad spectrum of different topics that we get involved in.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much. And to round that off, Colin Wallis from the Kantara initiative, as I mentioned right at the top of the session. It's a global commons that operates a trust framework and conformity assessment program for digital identity, and it also develops specifications. The most well-known of which, specifications of best practice, most well-known of which are user-managed access, UMA, and consent receipt. Both of these are into international standards organisations and internationally standardised. So, with that, thank you, panel, for your introductions. And shall we go to the first of the topics, please? And that is, and I'm queuing up David to start us off in this so he's got a bit of time to think about it. So the first topic was, will financial services sector embrace a decentralized ID model? And we're thinking particularly about KYC and AML and how that relates into verifiable claims and for things like age verification. David, would you like to start us off, please?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Colin. It's a bit difficult to really sort of, look into the future as to whether or not they will actually do it. If the question is, should they do it or why would they do it? I think, the interesting thing is when you look at the cost for banks and for financial services and really any regulated industry, and that includes telcos, to know their customers, it's very high. And essentially there is a lot of waste here, where if they could start to reuse the KYC, the know your customer data, from previous accounts that people may have with banks or with telcos, this could streamline the system and reduce a lot of wastage. So really, decentralized identity is a trust framework that allows the banks or the telcos to actually start trusting the KYC information that's actually been generated on behalf of customers, potentially by their competitors. But the point here being that if it's the government that's actually issuing these credentials to the individual customers, there is that audit trail and the ability to actually go and validate the authenticity of those proofs. So I think there's a lot of good reasons why there'd be, cost benefits and also user experience benefits, customer benefits in not having to go through that pain of doing KYC every time you open up a new account. But will they do it? I don't know. There's a lot of commercial and technical and regulatory challenges.
Well, that's interesting, and perhaps Dia can mention to us, certainly with her work with Napier University and the unit that she's working in there, the blockchain unit. You mentioned actually in our preparation for the panel, Dia, you mentioned that there was a white paper that you might want to give some consideration to. So, what's your view on the role, of decentralized ID in this role?
Yeah, I mean, it's a profound topic, of course. Essentially, like if you think about it, the decentralized identity industry is evolving constantly, right? I mean, as we speak, W3C is incubating new standards. And David touched upon, costs and the fact that could we do with a decentralized identity system for financial services? The answer is absolute yes. The need is there. And in fact, funnily, in 2018, R3 Corda, actually, they ran a project where they did 300 KYCs and they had 39 institutions like BNP Paribas, Deutsche Bank, all participate in that to vet KYCs through a blockchain. And so the proof of concept was successful, right? It's not just a concept, it's been proven, and one can do it. The limitations of it is we need a more mature blockchain to be able to actually implement these things. We need self-sovereign digital identity to become a reality, because at the end of the day, a decentralized economy needs a decentralized identity system, right? And as we all know, a decentralized system only works when you have mass adoption. So it's a bit of a chicken and egg. I think the financial services industry is not known for its collaborative nature, for sure. I've spent 20 years in financial services industry, and honestly, if even 10 years ago, if someone said that, can we do KYC like that? I used to be a private banker. I would say no, because at the end of the day, as David touched upon, banks are liable to the regulators independently, right? So collaboration works when there's collaboration everywhere, and then we don't have the trust framework along with that. So I think, the short answer to me is I would like it to happen. And I think with every day that we have more development in the underlying technology, we are closer to it. But when it would happen is a guess, is everybody's guess. But it's an exciting place anyways. So a while ago, actually, I did a white paper onto seeing whether organizations can actually do this, and whether we can have a collaborative system where everybody can use their identity, where they can distribute it. And in that process, we realized the limitations are we have blockchains which are interoperable, identity solutions which are being developed, but they're also interoperable. So interoperability is a big problem. So once we get to a stage where we have mature blockchains where identity solutions are interoperable, we will see that as a reality, and I'm quite hopeful.
Great, that's interesting to hear. So, Gail, thinking back from your time at HSBC and your period of time in financial services, perhaps to an extent it may have been predating this, but do you have a view, particularly what you're doing now with Future Identity Council? What's your sense of the coming of decentralized ID for financial services?
I'm cautiously optimistic, Colin. I think financial service providers will adopt any technology that they think will be easier, cheaper, and lower cost to implement. And certainly larger organizations have the benefit of testing out different ideas. Dia was just talking about pilot programs and so forth. So they're usually interested in, even if from a risk management perspective, testing different technologies to see which one is most likely to work. And if they're very large, like HSBC was, we would test different technologies in different countries based on which one was best fit to an individual market. So I think the question here is really which technology in which market when. And the technology is actually pretty fragmented, as I think folks appreciate, but I categorize them as having two major types. The model folks were just discussing earlier in this conversation around decentralized, self-sovereign credentials that can be used for reusable KYC. But there's also government-issued digital IDs, which are digital versions, mobile driving licenses, mobile national IDs, and mobile passports, which are also emerging and concurrently starting to happen in the marketplace, with different countries and some US states implementing those digital versions of credentials. So I kind of call them like the hare and the turtle. So even though decentralized identity is still emerging itself, it's a bit more like the hare. It can move more quickly based on the momentum of private entities in particular, whereas governments could move pretty slowly with digital IDs, but they're also happening, right? They're both trying to get to a finish line where citizens can assert who they are morally and get access to services online and in person with much more ease than they can today, a material problem. So I think one thing to kind of keep in mind is that citizens do expect their governments to play a meaningful role here, right? Governments do provide identity credentials today, and it's a public good that they expect to continue to see their government offering. And these two technologies can ultimately be interoperable, right? So a government issued ID could help a decentralized KYC service to have more assurance that that person is who they say they are. Because if someone says they're Donald Duck enough times, folks could be convinced they're Donald Duck, but they're not really Donald Duck. So the government can play a meaningful role in assuring who someone is and standing behind that claim.
Yeah, very interesting. And it's now we should actually bring in the front line. Andrew Black, looking at the front line from from your perspective at NatWest and your role in consumer identity and your investment into open banking and so on, what's your sense of this?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting one, and I think how I see it at the moment is financial services would like to. I think the questions will be how are we enabled to do so, and how pure will that be? We talk about decentralization and self-sovereign, and I think some of the keywords from Dia and Gail around evolving and fragmented, which are kind of pretty hot at the moment. And I think that's one of the key pieces for us is we certainly see the benefits, and I think financial services as a whole do. And David touched on a few around looking to take costs out of the organisation, to streamline some of those processes for onboarding and KYC. There's a huge opportunity for banks, to kind of reduce some of those operational costs, but also a sizable one in terms of, looking to create new opportunities for us. I think our customers are also starting to expect it from us, which is really interesting to see. And we've kind of touched on a few times as well the role of government, and what we're seeing from research is customers are expecting us to do this type of thing. So not only onboard them easier, but also help play that role as custodians of identity, going forward. So the opportunity is there, and I think that's very recognised within the industry, and certainly within the UK and kind of larger banks. I think the questions will be, will regulation allow us, and when will regulation allow us to do so? So what will we be asked to store in time gone by, and what will we be asked to provision in a new model of digital identity? And this is where the new trust frameworks that are coming, thick and fast, and the W3C standards that help kind of guide that will certainly aid us to do so. So I think those are some of the main questions of what will we be asked to do in this model, and then also how pure of a decentralization will it be? As I touched on at the start. Now, will that be public interoperable blockchains, or will there be hybrid systems of self-sovereign and federated identity? I think that will be really interesting to see, but certainly the appetite is there, which is really exciting to see from within the sector and within the bank to test and pilot and learn. And I think the technology is usually not the challenging thing. It's the regulatory environment that sort of is our tortoise, I suppose, as well, to help kind of move this along. But yeah,
yes, absolutely.
The appetite and the will to do.
I certainly see that as well, that you've got this notion of the tech in fragmented it might be, but it is actually basically there. I mean, you could technically put together proofs of concept and so on with with the current tech, albeit as Dia said, immature, but getting there. So with that point in mind, you're quite right that without regulation, without AML, and some of those folks potentially, the slower moving part, and understandably so, they're all protecting our interests, wanting to be on board, and they will want to see a rock solid process and flow, so that trust across borders, across banks, are fully there. So yeah, really great, interesting points. So I hope, audience, that you've got some questions in the chat ready for that, for the panelists in our first topic. While we move to the second one, the second topic, just to remind you, is how can we ensure to build digital identity which enhances privacy and consent, granting users control over how their personal credentials are shared. And I want Gail to start us off, because if you recall in the past, in the first topic, she mentioned this point about, she brought up government. She was actually the first to bring up government, and the fact that we've actually got identity credentials being issued by the private sector, by the government sector, and how they're going to sort of kind of play together. Gail, would you like to start us off there?
Great, thanks, Colin. So absolutely, the technology digital IDs offer considerable promise to protect privacy and to empower users to control the data they release and have that consent. But the solutions are really only as good as how well they're designed, right, by communities, like those on this webinar. And there are two major considerations there. One is the art of the solution itself, and the second is how the user consent is enabled such that it truly delivers on the promise of data minimization. So on the first point around the architecture from a government credential point of view is really informed by what are the norms of that country already? How does the country think about privacy? So for liberal democracies that tend to believe in the rights of citizens and their private privacy, then they're going to lean in more to architectures that are empowering users, that decentralize information, and I would even suggest have that information stored on the device itself, so the user decides when that information would leave their device and go out to an individual relying party. But it wouldn't allow a government to be able to be Big Brother and monitor exactly what transactions and what data is being released when and so forth. So that's kind of an inherent structure to the architecture. Alternatively, one can have government solutions, some of which are out there today, which are centralizing that information, which would allow the government to see each individual transaction and how data is being shared and what those behaviors are and where they are and all that kind of stuff. So I think that's the first point, is how is it architected, and ensuring that those countries that really believe in protecting privacy are truly focusing on decentralized solutions, because the technology is there, that it can be used, and it's ready to go. It's just choosing those models. The second consideration is how the data consent works in order to really allow for data minimization. And this one's really tricky because the standards don't really define this today, right? There's this general sense amongst those of us in this sphere that, there's the possibility for data minimization, but how does that actually happen in practice? If you've got an entire government ID, 30 fields of data on your credential, and you're opening a bank account, it's pretty normal today for all that information to go over to the bank. But in reality, when you can release that field by field, you could release all 30 fields, or you could release only the fields that are relevant to opening an account. So here in the US, you have height and weight on your driving license. Do you really need height and weight to open a bank account? You need that to decide your creditworthiness to get a loan or a mortgage. In fact, it starts to be toxic to have data like that in your repository, and for an individual to intentionally or unintentionally use height and weight to make a decision. Maybe that becomes a factor in credit, which you didn't mean to happen. So the reality is that as a community, we can kind of put this kind of technology out there and say, sure, it can minimize data, but we actually have to do the kind of hard work to define what data is really needed for individual use cases and create the norms to enforce that before regulation dictates that for us.
Yeah, that's very interesting. The fact that zero knowledge proofs are here and technically done and used, but inside a real transaction and in a federated environment, that's great care has got to be taken. In fact, probably more than care, we've got to find a way to actually automate the minimization. So thanks. Any other panelists would like to jump in there? Just, anyone with a particular view?
Yeah,
I can jump in if you like, Colin.
Sorry, I think Andrew got there before you. David, you're after Andrew.
That's all right. So I think they're really good points from Gail. I think that the things that I would add that we're seeing is we have the capability to do these around zero knowledge proofs and building this out. I think what we're starting to see more of that's really interesting is the customer awareness and drive, and customers questioning more, not enough probably, but more, what do I need to share? So that example is a really great one, and the age verification one comes up over and over again. So do Tesco need to know that my date of birth is X? They just need to know I'm over 18 to buy beer on Friday night. Right, so that's the example, and customers are starting to challenge that a little bit more. And I think the kind of growing movement around data privacy and minimization, and for us it's key. Privacy by design is how we can design our products and services, but that's led by customers. Largely them starting to ask more questions, and that comes out with with press and big scary headlines of data breaches as well. But for us, it's been really interesting to see that trend of customers starting to question a little bit more of, well, do you need this, or do you just need proof of this as a one-off piece? So I think kind of focusing on that kind of customer insight and research has certainly helped, inform a lot of our product design and thinking, and it's certainly starting to see a little bit of a shift in the dial there.
Yeah, great. That's interesting. David, sorry to cut across you there. You've got the floor now, sir.
No, I was just going to build on what Andrew's just said, really. I mean, when you look at customer attitudes to their data, I think there is a growing realization of the value of their data and how their data is used and monetized on the web. But equally, I think, people are increasingly distrustful of the organizations that have been managing their data to date. And they're very much aware that no matter how hard a company may try to protect your data, they are vulnerable to attacks, to all kinds of cyber attacks. So I think, the customers now, the public are starting to realize that actually putting any of their data out there in the cloud is a bad idea. And it is better, therefore, through a decentralized approach to sort of take these honeypots out of the picture and give the users control of their information. And then, as Gail was saying, then you can decide what information you're going to share, and you can make sure that the information that you share is proportionate to the purpose and the way that it's going to be used. Ultimately, you're still sharing data. It might still be cached and stored by the recipients. It may still be hacked, but it takes us down that path of starting to avoid these silos of people just amassing as much data as they can in the cloud. But of course, the problem is then that disrupts their business models. So then it comes around to the commercialization is one of the big challenges. So the technology is there, as I think some of the panelists have said. How do you monetize it, and how do you make this a viable ecosystem for all the players? And I think it's those kind of questions, as well as the regulatory questions and certifying the issuers of these credentials, are some of the challenges that we've yet to really resolve.
Yeah, so good points there. Before we just go on to item 3. Topic 3. Anything from Dia or Gail? We have a segue into item 3, but
if I may, the only thing I wanted to add to that is, Gail very beautifully touched upon the fact that it is, countries which have a privacy-centric value system, right? When they design, so when you have a government-issued identity and that government respects privacy, right? That's very different from a government which is looking to, exert control on their citizens. So to me, there are two aspects. I think if you look at just digital identity and decentralized digital identity, they're two different things, right? A digital identity, you can actually do all the things that we were discussing about, whether I want to go and buy a bottle of wine, or they need to know that I am 18 plus. And if I just have a digital of a driving license, right, I could pick and choose, right, what document I'm sharing. When you're talking about a decentralized identity system, it has to be citizen-centric. It has to be, and the only way one can achieve it, and I'm curious today, and I'm learning a whole bunch of things today from the wonderful panelists, is to see, can it be done without a self-sovereign way? To me, because the way I look at it is, right now, where is my identity documents? It's stored in that drawer behind me, my passport, my driving license. It's in my possession. And then I decide to sort of give it to a bank when I want to open a bank account. I decide to give it to a mortgage lender when I want a mortgage. So it is in my control. When I'm passing away with that information and it's secured, and going back to David's point, if it's stored in a central repository of one particular organization, I feel a bit unsure about it, because you talked about ransomware and cybersecurity. Ransomware hits an organization, I think, once every 14 seconds. So we have GDPR issues. If we're going to be custodians of data, right, then we have stronger frameworks, and today we don't have that. If I go by India, for instance, when Indians apply for a visitor's visa to the UK, they have to go through a third party, and that third party collects all that information. It's all vital information, your passport, date of birth, even your sometimes your house deeds and things like that. And it's collected by a private company, and documents are just flying around there, right? And you don't even have to be technologically advanced to hack that information. There is a high level of poverty. So all you have to do is pay someone probably £50 and you'll be able to get data of maybe 500 people who are looking to visit the United Kingdom next month. So we have these issues in emerging countries. And there you would only have self-sovereign digital identity, which would work.
So it's interesting, isn't it? It's a perfect segue in many respects to the last topic, because there's this notion of those who are incented and motivated for whatever environmental reasons to want to take control of their digital identity, and so maybe it's an environmental thing, and that's really as we lead into this, are users actually ready to take control of their digital identity? And it's you've touched on it. I think all panelists have in fact touched on it in the last topic. In the remaining time that we've got, which is not long, anyone can have at this one. Do you think that users are ready to take control of their digital identity, panel?
I'll jump on that one first, maybe
Okay.
Colin.
Go.
I'm a glass half full, kind of girl. So I believe that there will be the super users, the individuals who are extremely interested, who I think Andrew was referring to, who are like, really, I do care about what data you really need to have from me. So there'll be some super users who want to actively engage with the community in order to ensure that only the appropriate data is being used. And you hear that often from the developer community. They tend to be quite informed about privacy, and they want to see from a community perspective that better norms are established, and they will comment, right? They'll comment to the bank, they'll comment to their retailer, they'll comment to whoever if they believe data is being used inappropriately. They might do it very loudly on Twitter and through other channels, right? So it's kind of the super users. And then I think that there are the people who, if a service is made available to them, could be through a digital platform, could be through their bank, could be through their government launching a service. If it's made available, they're the early adopters, right? They're going to jump on, they'll start using a service that they think has credibility. And then you're going to have the curve of adoption, the inevitable, those who are concerned about data and concerned, and maybe they'll lean into it if it's easy enough for them to onboard to the service. And then you'll have those that are reticent, that are quite concerned, that are inherently worried about what government is trying to do or what their bank is trying to do, and they may never adopt, or they're way off in the future. So I think we'll see that curve, but I think there really is that appetite from those first segments of the community that if a great service and capability is offered to them and it has really compelling use cases, they'll jump on it.
Yeah, that's interesting. I know from my own, from my own experience, with my mother-in-law in charge of a smartphone for the first time in the last 6 months or so. It's a real learning experience for those folks who, are not tech savvy, and so we've got to be inclusive and aware of their situations as well. Panel, sorry, I jumped in there.
May I add to Gail's point? I think there is another segment of people who would be early adopters, and that comes from emerging countries, because there are 1 billion people across the world who don't have an officially recognizable identity. A lot of them are in sub-Saharan Africa. If you think about it, right, the interesting thing about emerging markets and emerging countries is the fact that they never had the traditional infrastructure to begin with. So when you don't have the traditional infrastructure, you actually, they are adopting newer technologies faster. So there are places in India where you don't have water, but they'll have a smartphone. And there are people who are, there's microfinancing which is happening using a smartphone. So I actually feel that there is a big segment of the emerging world who would be early adopters. We just need governments who are just more open and respect people's privacy, and we need interoperable solutions, and we will see a better world.
Great. Thank you. I think both Andrew and David wanted to jump in there. So, Andrew, can I spare some minutes for you, sir?
Yeah, no problem. Sorry, I've pipped David again here. I think to answer the question around our kind of users and customers ready for it, I think ideologically, yes, but in practice, no, not yet, and not yet on their own. And I think it's interesting here some of the language on early adopters. We have similar cohorts around customers who are sort of data fundamentalists, who are probably those on this panel who are reading the terms and conditions and reading the solids and inrups of the world, and really kind of out the forefront of this, which is the minority. And then we also have data agnostics who are using login with Facebook and really don't care, are happy to share data, happy to make sure that whatever's easiest to do, don't mind what's out there, don't mind the risks. But then the bulk is data pragmatists, really, and that's where the trade-off is of they want value for what they're doing, but they want to use these services, they want control, but they want trust underpinned by it. And a lot of them we're seeing aren't yet ready to do that entirely on their own. Would like a trusted organization to be there as a backup, as a safety net to support them in this. So I think that's a really interesting opportunity for us to see how we can help customers.
Right. So, David, as representing the GSMA, mobile network operators, are they the trusted? Can they be trusted around the world?
Well, obviously the answer is yes, but I mean it's a very interesting point that Andrew raises around control and trust, because I think this is the crux of it. I think people do want control. They don't necessarily trust other people to look after their identity. They don't necessarily trust themselves to look after their identity. I think a good analogy is, for the majority of us, we trust the banks to look after our money, but some people would prefer to have all of their cash, stuffed under the mattress. Some people wouldn't want to have lots of money in their wallets or their purses because they might be worried that they're going to lose it or they're going to be mugged, and therefore they prefer having it somewhere else. So I think it often comes down to what is it the customers really want, and then what are the architectures that can support it. Because I think it was either Gail or Gail raised this question around self-sovereign identity. You could have a distributed framework where the issuers of the identity credentials are the ones that actually retain, if you like, the control and the authority for actually serving those credentials. And it's the user that's given them the control of providing permissions for when that entity is allowed to share and what they're allowed to share with the relying party. And essentially, that's what they've been trying to do with eIDAS in Europe, for many years. So there are kind of different approaches. And I think you've got to look at the customer need and actually top down, see what technology and, stuff you've got in the toolkit to address that need, rather than bottom up saying, hey, we've got this new, wonderful sort of sparkly self-sovereign identity decentralized framework, and it's going to be superb. And then trying to educate people and actually tell them that this is really what they want. So yeah, it's a tricky question. You've got to do a little bit top down, bottom up.
It'd be a perfect use case for UMA, incidentally, just putting a little bit of a push in there for Kantara, because user managed access does exactly that. It allows the user to take control of who it gives permission to release data to. So that's interesting. We're pretty much out of time here, folks. So thank you. I just want to take this opportunity to thank the panel so much for what an engaging conversation that was, and looking forward to answering these questions, those that we've been able to do along the way, and for the final minutes before we close into the next panel. Thank you, everyone. Great job, really interesting discussion, and I do hope that the audience enjoyed it as much as I did moderating it. Thank you so much, everyone. See you later.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Colin.
Thanks, folks. Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Colin. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Colin.